Theater for me has been a tool that allows me to name my scars, to own my wounds, and to become the voice of those who have always been censored and silenced throughout time.
This is the 21st century, and we need to redefine revolution. This planet needs a people's revolution.
Hello, Global Village. Welcome to Inner Character. This is a space where I share my ongoing research into how Black women use theater and performance as a medium of transformational healing. I have my own understanding and interpretation of what I believe trauma to be, looking at my own lived experiences as a child and as an adolescent, as a young adult, as a mother, as a theater maker. Today, I'm specifically looking at defining the different kinds of trauma and the forms in which trauma exists and how trauma shows up in our life. My name is Debbie Young Anitafrika.
How do I use theater to recover from trauma? Unwittingly, intentionally, by embracing the joy and the sorrow, by finding the humor in the darkness and the absurd in the hurtful. Sharing stories in a darkened room airs it all out, so there is no place for shame to hide.
A third category that trauma practice tells us about is historical, collective, or intergenerational trauma. This trauma is characterized by psychological or emotional difficulties which can affect different communities, cultural groups, and generations. Adaptive coping patterns can be passed intergenerationally. Examples might include racism, enslavement, forcible removement from a family or community, genocide, or war.
I use theater to deal with mortality, my own mortality, and the mortality of people around me. I feel like in this way, theater is really a part of my grieving process. And every play I've ever written is me performing to living people, but it's really about me talking to dead people.
So we know that our lives are shaped by social, economic, and political conditions and factors that impact how we experience the everyday, how we work, how we make families, how we grow, how we live, and that these factors are layered and intersecting. When I'm thinking about Black womanhood, I'm thinking about race, I'm thinking about class, I'm thinking about gender, I'm thinking about sexual orientation, all the ways in which we identify and how those ways intersect. And now, how do we move these personal experiences of trauma, and given those multiple definitions of trauma, the different forms of trauma, how do we then translate those experiences and move them onto the stage?
I use theater as a surgical theater, a place to dissect, dig deep, open up, rip apart, and expose the things that are sickly and uncomfortable inside of me, of society, of life as a whole.
How do we navigate the traumas in our own bodies, i.e., journey through and into self-recovery, and then move that process onto the stage? Or is it that we move that process onto the stage as a part of self-recovery? These are the questions that this PhD research is attempting to investigate. When I think of my own self and my relationship to dub poetry, for example, I can remember when I was about 19, I wrote my first poem that delved deeply into sexual trauma as a child. And I remember the first time I performed that poem, the absolute difficulty I had with getting through the whole entire piece, because as I was reading the poem on stage, I was having flashbacks. And there was a part of me that understood that I needed to complete that storytelling process in order to begin healing. But then there were other parts of me that were so terrified of reliving that moment on stage, and yet another part that was thinking about the audience being on the receiving end and on the watching end of this process as it was unfolding on stage, and what was going on for them, and what were my responsibilities to them as a storyteller to hold them through that process. I remember a friend of mine coming up onto the stage and holding me and then whispering in my ear, "You can finish it. You can complete this poem. You can get to the end." And staying with me so that I could get to the end. And I want to understand how other Black women theater makers navigate through their own traumas enough to move it to the stage, enough to write a piece, enough to take a community through the process. And what are their considerations around triggering an audience, triggering themselves, holding an audience once they go through that process? We're going to do this step by step by step. Thank you for joining us. I will see you on the next episode of Inner Character.
This is the 21st century, and we need to redefine revolution. This planet needs a people's revolution.
I want to send a big shout out to all the Black women all over the world who have been so generous in sharing with me their perspectives, frameworks, entry points into theater for ritual recovery. Enough big up, enough love. Love you a long time.